Speaker, last week we learned that our economy began to shrink in November, back when oil prices were at $75. The Bank of Canada recently said that middle-class families in Western Canada face falling home prices and job losses. Why is the government giving a $2 billion tax break to those who don't need it, the wealthy, and nothing to those who actually do need it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what this government is doing is bringing in tax reductions and benefits for every single Canadian family. Expansion of the universal child care benefits so that we not only raise the amount of money we give for those with children under 6, but we give benefits all the way up to the age of 17. Expansion, Mr. Speaker, of the children's fitness tax credit. More deductions for expense costs that families incur. And, Mr. Speaker, of course, the family tax cut to ensure that one-income families are treated fairly under the tax system. We know the Liberal Party wants to raise those taxes on 100% of those Canadian families. We're going to cut taxes.
The honourable member for Papineau.
Mr. Speaker, the government slashed the infrastructure budget by 90%, right when the middle class needs investment and better jobs. The Prime Minister insists on giving a tax break to the wealthiest. His priorities are wrong. Investment in infrastructure, which the provinces are calling for, will help all Canadians, but the Prime Minister only wants to help the 15% of the wealthiest. Why is that? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Our policy is tax cuts for 100% of Canadian families and an increase in the universal child care benefit for all families. These policies are policies that the Liberals have opposed for a long time. They want to raise taxes on Canadian families. That's quite the opposite of our policy.
Mr. Speaker, in the years following 9/11, the current Justice Minister said parliamentarians could provide a credible and independent check and balance to oversee our national security agencies and the power of the state. So why has the government left parliamentary oversight out of its current anti-terror bill?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, we already have a rigorous system of oversight on our national security and police agencies. Specifically on intelligence, we have the Security Intelligence Review Committee, which is a robust mechanism, independent, expert, third-party oversight, Mr. Speaker. It functions very well. We're proud of the work they're doing, Mr. Speaker. What we have to tackle now, Mr. Speaker, is making sure our police and security agencies have the power necessary to tackle terrorism and violent jihadism. That's it.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellan. The new security bill does nothing to solve the problem of resources. Currently, CSIS is unable to monitor everyone who's been identified as a potential threat. Officials are already overwhelmed with the number of files on high-risk travelers. How does the minister expect these new powers to be useful when CSIS can't even cope with its current workload? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, seven times here in the House we have increased the budget for CSIS and the RCMP. And 7 times the opposition parties have opposed that. But today, Mr. Speaker, with our increases of about 1/3 of CSIS's budget, that's over $200 million more that CSIS will be able to use to protect Canadians. And they need tools, but even yesterday the opposition opposed that. The Honourable Member. Obviously, you can't increase the powers of CSIS without at the same time increasing the powers of the civilian watchdog. But instead of doing that, the Conservatives are reducing the oversight powers. Why refuse to increase civilian oversight now when it's more needed than ever? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canada is at war with terrorists, with jihadis, and in order to do that, we have CSIS. We see freedom and safety as going hand in hand. And we have a great model here in Canada for civilian oversight. They have my full confidence and the confidence of Canadians. Thank you.
Member for Victoria.
Well, way back in 2005, even the Minister of Justice thought more oversight of CSIS was a good idea. Here's what he said, and I quote, "It would cause a little bit more diligence on the part of the security agents themselves, just knowing that this oversight body was in place." Well, Mr. Speaker, oversight helps prevent abuses. Makes sense, right? But instead of making good on these words, the Conservatives have actually cut CSIS oversight. So a simple question. Does the Minister of Justice still believe more oversight would help prevent these abuses?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, the international jihadist movement has declared war on Canada, Mr. Speaker, and we believe that third-party, non-partisan, independent, expert oversight of our national security agencies is a much better model than political intervention in the process, Mr. Speaker. And also, key powers of the new legislation are subject to judicial review and judicial authorization, Mr. Speaker. It's much more than the empty talk of the NDP who have opposed measures against terrorism yesterday, Mr. Speaker.
That's right. The Honourable Member for Victoria.
I guess accountability sounded just fine to the Conservatives until they had to start actually being accountable. But one thing is very clear. Much more needs to be done to stop radicalization on the ground in Canadian communities. Canadians all across the country, in community centres and, yes, in mosques, are doing this work already. And they're trying to get the federal government to help. These groups are our best allies in ensuring hatred and violence are rejected in Canada. So why have the Conservatives failed to reach out and support them?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
It looks, Mr. Speaker, like it's a wake-up call for the NDP, Mr. Speaker. More than a year ago, this government has introduced the Combating Terrorism Act with our strategy, Mr. Speaker, our counter-terrorism strategy that has 4 pillars, Mr. Speaker. The first pillar, prevention. What did the NDP? They oppose all the measures we put forward to fight terrorism, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hamilton East, Stoney Creek.
Mr. Speaker, as of today, Mohamed Fahmy, the award-winning Canadian journalist, has spent 402 days detained by Egyptian authorities. He was in prison because he was doing his job as a journalist. His friend, Australian colleague Peter Just, was released over the weekend. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs please inform the House as to the status of the release of Mr. Fahmy?
The Honourable Secretary of Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Consular have raised this issue regarding Mr. Fahmy's case with our counterparts, and I can tell you that this has been raised at all levels of our government. We welcome positive developments and remain hopeful that Mr. Fahmy's case will be resolved shortly.